MK, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Doing great. Having a wonderful day. As it's Friday, so that's a good thing.
Oh yeah, it is Friday. Oh my
Lose track
gosh.
of days. I'm the same way. A lot of days feel the same when you work from home. I'm sure you feel that way as well.
I forget constantly. Like my kids have half days on Wednesdays and I'm always paranoid. I'm gonna forget to pick them up.
Oh my goodness, I cannot even. We homeschool, so I can't even imagine thinking about that. We haven't had to think. We pick our kids up from activities and stuff, but not from school. So the things you
Yeah.
forget about. Um, I'm excited to talk to you about. There's all sorts of things that we can talk about, things we have in common, things that we differ on. But I always love to begin with how long have you been writing and publishing?
Well, that depends on what you define as publishing, and
Sure.
that depends on how you define writing. So my first story that I ever wrote was in third grade called Dr. Scuba.
Okay.
And I didn't want to be an author until I was probably 10 or 12. And I had a bestseller author in my family, James H. Cobb. And he was very close to me. And I mean, really, really a close mentor and family member to me. He wasn't just some distant family member. And so he used to tell me stories. He used like half the books on the shelf here, he bought me, you know.
That's cool.
When when we'd go to Tacoma here in Washington, that's where he lived, and that's where he lived with his mother. He'd often take me to Barnes and Nobles and he'd buy me a stack of books. And so he gave me like this goalpost of being an author, you know. And by the time I was like 15, I was like, no, seriously, my goal is to be an author. And I started writing novels probably at around 14 or 15, at around there. And they were handwritten, like, college lined notebooks, terrible, terrible romance novels. Um, I was rereading the very first one just recently, and I was just cringing. Not only the spellings, but also just this is awful. But it's nice to go back and see how far you've come. And I'm 35 now, so if I think back, I'm 15, 14 years old at the time. That's 21, 20 years.
Wow, that is crazy. And I imagine the time probably went fast too. It gets
No,
faster. No, slow.
no. It was a harrowing journey of trying to figure out how to tell a story. It started out as like, how do I even write 20 pages handwritten?
Hmm.
How do I even do that and keep myself interested? And then it
Mm.
was like, okay, how do I go further? How, it wasn't even a matter of following like the the beats, like the story beats, which I learned way later. I was trying to figure out just how to keep myself interested in initially, and I wasn't. For like, I would get 20 to 40 pages in and I'd be like, I'm done. I don't know what to do here. I'm roadblock. I don't know. So like for probably the first 6 years of my writing journey, there's like 20 stories that are only 20 to 40 pages long.
Fascinating.
So I just didn't even know what I was doing. I would go to my cousin Jim and I'd be like, "What am I doing?" And he'd say, because he'd call me Mally. He said, Mally, you write a million words, and your million and first word will be publishable. Just just keep going. And I was just like, that kind of sucks. Or
Yeah.
direction, man.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, I don't know what else to tell you.
Just the
He's like,
reality.
there's tons of books that'll tell you how to write, but he's like, all of them are trash. You just got to figure it out for yourself, you know? And that's what I've come to realize is most of the how-tos and are very opinion based. And if you're going to really find your voice and find the stories that you want to tell, how you want to tell it, you got to just kind of clear all of everybody else telling you how to do it out.
Well, I think that's an interesting thing to talk about, right? Because the market is saturated with how to for writing and structuring and getting your books on the page. And I admittedly haven't read any of them. And I think it's mainly because I'm not a plotter, like at all. I'm a massive discovery writer, as in higher on the scale. I barely think about the future of my stories. They just kind of happen. Um, but it's interesting because I have found that of the useful, quote unquote, useful things people put on social media or podcasts or, whatever, these helps to help you write, I still find that I'm not following them anyway. Because I'm just writing what feels comfortable to me. And people can attest that as I write more, like, oh wow, your books are getting better and better, your stories are getting better and better. And it's just natural because I'm finding that voice. You just have to find it. But it's a hard pill to swallow, particularly for someone who is impatient or someone who wants to just know what their voice is right this second. And it's just,
Well, and
it's
in my
challenging.
opinion, your voice changes too, because I'm a
Yeah, that's true.
multi-genre writer. And when, if you go and like say, look at my fan fiction or look at my spicy content versus my
Mm,
more wholesome MK work, because my MK work isn't necessarily wholesome, but it's definitely work that I don't mind if my mom, dad, grandparents, I don't care who reads this because it's relatively clean
mm-hmm,
fiction. I'm not really worried about it. But all of these different varieties of my work carry kind of a slightly different voice,
mm-hmm,
you know? And it's made me realize that, people talk about finding your voice as a writer. Your voice has range. Everybody's voice has range.
mm-hmm.
And it just depends on what you're working on and whether or not you're exercising those parts, and it's kind of an interesting exploration
Mm-hmm.
of voice. And I like being a multi-genre author for that reason.
It definitely provides variety, but definitely insight into the way your mind works. You learn a lot about yourself as you're writing, which is an interesting discovery. I'm not saying that people who don't write might not ever discover those things, but it just provides a different window into your mind. When you're getting these stories out, how you might perceive things, the way the world might look, or how you might imagine someone else feeling and experiencing the world. It's just fascinating. So what made you
It's
just
it's
so go ahead.
it's definitely a bit of shadow work, like Carl Jung.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know Carl Jung, but that's how I did a lot of my preliminary shadow work was through writing and
Mm-hmm.
writing different characters through fan fiction. So I would take really, really dark characters and I would flesh them out in writing and try to get to the bottom of these very complex characters. And if I could get to the bottom of what I perceive who they are, I found I was kind of getting to the bottom of who I might be, you
Sure.
know?
Yeah. Absolutely. What made you decide to go? We haven't spoken about the genres that you write in, and it's probably a complex question to answer, which is totally fine. But what made you decide to write what you do? Was it preference in reading? Was it just kind of, did it feel natural as you began writing the various genres to try new ones?
Well, with my pen names, I write to market, so I want to get paid.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
I
Okay. Sure.
I write to market with my pen names, but when it comes to my MK work, I write the stories that come to me that are
Mm-hmm.
really important to me philosophically. When it comes to also the characters, um, like Wingless, this is a world that just came to me, not fully formed, of course. I also write and discover it along the way, and then in rewrites, I have to go and try to make sense of this chaos that I just
Yep.
created. But the characters came to me, and they're very messed up because of their environment. So it's
Mm.
kind of like a nature versus nurture type of situation. And that time, nature versus nurture, is concepts very heavy in my MK work. And it's something that I didn't really anticipate, but it's just something that has kind of evolved because the science fiction novel that's going to be coming up, I call it NLC, but it's called The Neon Lights of Sestafon. And it's a futuristic novel, based not in the distant future, but in about 2050s,
Mm-hmm.
2050s, where we have what I call the NLC chip. It's a neurochip link. And when we go to sleep, we go back to being awake in a platform.
Hmm.
So our bodies go to sleep. We go through the biological shutdown that our brain needs. But then there's this digital link of ourselves, and we get to go play in a world, which buys us time, more time of life. Because how much time do we spend sleeping?
Not enough,
Well,
but a lot.
there there's very sinister things at work though within that company, which I call Sans Link. So that's related to the sands of time, Sans Link,
Mhm.
and the kind of evil. He's not evil, actually. I find I identify a lot with this very Machiavellian character I call the Sandman.
Hmm.
But he he owns Sans Link. And anyways, so like a lot of my novels surround time, like even in Wingless, there's the clepsydra. And I don't know if you know what a clepsydra is, but
Mm-mm.
it's an ancient water clock, and it tells time through the beats of the drips.
Sure.
And one interesting fact about the clepsydras of ancient time is when it's warmer, the time goes by faster because of thermodynamics. And when
Mm-hmm.
it's colder, time goes slower. And so when you have a society that somewhat worships time and meditates to time, and they have to sit and observe the hours, and it's cold, it's longer. And then this blessed time period when it gets warmer, they love it. You start really, like time. We aren't really acknowledging our time right now. Like
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about it before on TT, how much time is being wasted. And in my books, I'm trying to pay homage to time.
Mm-hmm. That sounds fascinating. I already want to read it, and it's not even published yet.
It is actually.
Oh, it is. Well, Wingless is, but
Wingless is.
the futuristic story you described before, it hasn't been
No,
published yet.
that is in its dev edits right now. I'm dev editing it at the moment.
Oh,
Yeah.
edits.
Oh, edits. Yeah.
That's all we can say about that. But so as you've been writing these different genres, how do you know that you've found your voice that's appropriate for that genre? Does it just feel right? Do you find it more as you edit?
So Wingless went through 10 rewrites.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Um, one of its initial writes was 200,000 words long. Before I sent the final of what I thought was the final, it was 148,000 words.
Hmm.
And my editor cut it down to 125.
Wow.
And I had some, arguments towards it, but I was like, you know what? I'm so done with this project. Let's just push it, because I got to get to book two. So I kind of just was like, you know what? The things that you cut, I can put back in book two or book three. So I'm not going to kibitz on this. I'm not going to argue. Let's just go.
You reach
So
that point as you're you're editing.
yes, I reached that point because 10 rewrites, 10 rewrites. That's more than a million words
Hmm.
for this one book. I was so done. I
I'm impressed with your patience. I'm not positive that I would have even made it to the third. Your
I
dedication
literally
is
I have
unsound.
in this room, it's a stack of all my rights of
Wow.
Wingless.
Do you
Yeah.
handwrite them still?
No,
You
but I
just type
print
now. Okay.
I print off
Each right.
each right. Yeah. Each version. And that becomes a problem because when I go for the editing, the final, I don't remember what version. Like, I go and I go and I read my copy, and I don't know what version I'm holding all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I did. And I don't recommend that many versions. I really don't. But that is how unsure I was with my voice. I was so unsure with the way I was telling this story that it required it.
That's so
But
challenging.
I'm not that way with every story. Like Neon is one one draft, and it's already pretty good. So it just really depends on the genre. It depends on the type of story that I'm telling. It really just depends.
Well, I think that's generally true with a lot of things, right? Each story is going to be different. The writing process might feel and look different, especially as you develop and evolve in your writing career. But, and this is a question that might not even have a straight answer, but at least for you, how do you know when you've reached the acceptable point of voice for a publishable story? Like, how did you, aside from being done, but for Wingless, what gave you the confidence? They're like, this is enough. This is the voice that I wanted to capture. How did you recognize that
I don't know that I recognized it in Wingless, but
as much?
I recognize it when I read my work in general, like
Mm-hmm.
in general way, and it's like 6 months later or a year later, and consistently I don't even recognize my words, and I'm like, "Ooh, that's good. Ooh, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
It's a
yeah,
good
I
feeling.
did that. I did that." you know.
I enjoy that revelation when I'm going through some work, like, oh, I didn't know I could write like that. Like that feels good. That's impressive. Because during the moment, or even sometimes during editing, you're wondering, oh, is this even any good? There are moments like that when you hit those good moments. It's like, okay, that I didn't
I
realize I had that in me.
I don't often like to reread my work. Like most of my pen name work, I drop it hot. I never look at it again. I don't want anything to do with it. I am done.
Mm-hmm.
Walk away, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there are some things that I revisit, and when I revisit it, and I feel that kind of like, ooh, that's so pretty, or
Mm-hmm.
that's so good. um, that's when I know, okay, that's where you're building that foundational trust in yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and your ability to convey what you want to say
Yeah.
about any given subject. And I feel like if you're doing multi-genre work, the more you write in different things and like what you are reading of your own work, you build that confidence.
That's interesting that you mentioned confidence in yourself. It's something that I think a lot of authors lack at various points of the process without even realizing it. And it might lend to challenges with feeling motivation to write or hitting walls or writer's block, right? Some of that might fall back onto, well, you're missing confidence in yourself. So it's kind of interesting to look at it from that perspective. I don't think that's the cause every time, but I think sometimes it may be part of the challenge.
I think a lot of the part of the challenge that I experience when it comes to imposter syndrome
Yeah.
is not in my own work. Like when
Mm-hmm.
I'm analyzing my own work or I'm getting feedback from people who are reading my work, it's pretty overwhelmingly positive when people read my work. But when I go on TT, it's not any of the other social medias, but when I go on TT and you're dealing with the peers who are
Mm-hmm.
publishing multiple books a year and they're looking down on you because they're only viewing one of your pen names, or MK is me, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as far as they're concerned, it's a pen name. They're drawing conclusions about you based upon one image, and you're not outputting to their level. So I can't help. It's so psychologically messed up what your own brain does, even though I know that I've put out so much work this year, so much. And still, I'm like, it's not good enough. I've only gotten one MK thing out this year. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
wait a second. Wait a second. I know what I'm doing. And
Mm-hmm.
it's this very strange environment out there that eats away at your confidence,
Mm-hmm.
even when you're doing well, even when you're providing and paying bills and living good. It's toxic.
It bleeds in for sure, and it has a way on of affecting your ability to continue writing with your voice. And I've experienced this as well, even though I've also received pretty good feedback about the books that I've written and published. You still just get this kind of how do I say this, offhand judgment or from various things that you view on social media, particularly TikTok, which you've mentioned before, which can make it feel like when you get to that writing session, you're like, is this any good? Like I've been told I felt confident about this before, but is it really any good? Just because of this kind of secondhand judgment, negativity, and whatnot makes you worry that it isn't worth anything, that your voice isn't enough. When in reality, it is, and it has to be because your voice is what you are and what you will sell. And
Mm-hmm.
whether or not people like it is their decision. But with billions of people in the world, there's people who like your voice and who will read your voice. And trying to remember that is always tricky.
And it's very hard in the environment that we're in because it's such a small group. Like it is such a
Yeah,
money, like I think it's the most financially growing niche on TikTok, on TT.
yep,
But at the same time, it is such a small group. We see the same faces over and over and over
true. Yeah.
again. And when people go hard against an author for whatever it may be, people forget that you might not be the audience that was for that book.
Right.
You are not meant to be its reader, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And that's fine, you know, for you to be critical of it. You just postered it all over social media. Hopefully it'll find its reader base. But it's all very subjective, and that's something that I try to tell myself is everybody has readers.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody does. You've just got to go find your tribe. You got to go find your people. And that's sometimes very hard to do, but they are there.
I say it's very hard to do. I'm definitely in the throng of no tribe, no audience, but I'm actively, well, I feel like actively, but perhaps not as actively as I could be seeking that audience to partake, I'll say is the best word for it, of the voice that I inject into the stories that I have. So, but it does make me a little bit, how do I say this, unapologetic about disliking things, not out loud, right? I mean, I can read a book. Historically, I would read books and be concerned that like I don't want to not read this book because that's an offense to the author, or I should give it a chance. But just remember that, like, yeah, it just doesn't jive with me, and that's okay. I don't need to go and spout to the world that it's the worst book I've ever read because I just recognize it wasn't my cup of tea, and that's okay. I can just set it aside and move on and find something else that does interest me.
You know, I got a lot of flack about toxic positivity in the beginning because
Mm-hmm.
when I first came to TikTok, I said, I'm an author. I am not going to talk bad about other authors or their books, not on a public platform. Do I read critically? Do I have books that I'm just like, oh my gosh, no,
Mm.
that's no. Yes, I feel that way about some books, but am I going to go on a public space and rip it to shreds? No, I'm a fellow author. I know what that's like. I'm going to leave that for reviewers. You know, I'm going to leave that for people who don't know what it's like, you know, to rip something to shreds. And I got a lot of flack for that. And I just, from a professional standpoint, I don't want to leave bad reviews. I will not leave a review.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've done that as well. But I mean, even for the reviewers, the people that do give negative reviews, I take it with a grain of salt. I'm just like, just because that was your preference, whatever you drew from the story, I'm not going to assume that that is the end all and be all of the story, especially if I've already expressed some interest in reading said book, whatever it may be. I mean, I don't have any specific examples, but then the flip flop can be true. There's some books that people hold in high regard and praise left and right, but I know that the content of that book is not what I like to read, and so I will avoid it because
Mm-hmm.
whether or not you're interested in it, I know that's not for me, particularly spicy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't prefer it. I don't read it. It's not my cup of tea, and so I won't. But if you like it, great. Praise it and enjoy it all you'd like. I just
It's
know I
it,
won't get into it.
it's interesting you brought up spicy. So being that two of my pen names works under spice because that's where you make money. I'm
Oh yeah. Oh,
sorry.
I'm
This
aware of that.
unfortunately
I know that to be true.
that's where you make money. But my in a way my career started writing fan fiction and spicy fix-its, you know? And that was during my early 20s. And it was like, wow, back then I really enjoyed what I was doing. And now it's like, my heart is not in this. You
Mm-hmm.
know, my heart, I don't read spicy anymore, hardly at all. And I only do it if somebody wants me to arc read or beta read for them. And it's just like, I don't know. I'm not, I'm, I'm too old for this. I'm too old
Yeah.
for this. I'm now just wanting to figure out other things in my life. You know, I already found my panda. I already found my penguin.
Mm-hmm.
My fixation with romance is just not what it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah.
feel like as a writer myself, I have evolved and I used to think when I was 15, I'm going to be a romance writer. I'm going to be a romance writer. And I am, but I never thought that I was going to be a psychological, philosophical, science fiction, and epic fantasy writer. I did not I did not think these things would converge.
Mm-hmm.
And
But
that's
here
what
you are.
I but that's what MK is.
Yep.
And so it's like that's what I want to be writing about. I want to write different stories, and that's with no judgment towards people who want to read that. It's
Right.
just I feel like I've evolved to a different point in my life where I'm no longer invested as much in those stories to tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that makes total sense. Books that I read when I was younger don't interest me as much as they did. And that's, I've tried to reread a couple things. I'm like, really, I don't know why I liked this when I was younger. Maybe the prose isn't quite what I'd like, or maybe the characters. I'm a very character driven reader and writer. I like that. That's where I really enjoy stories. And if characters are flat, I don't care. Or if they don't have high stakes in the story, some people can listen to beautiful prose and have a great time. And I'm like, I don't care. I need something to have meaning for me from a character standpoint. But I don't think that really came until later. So these books that I read when I was younger, I wasn't bothered by some of those things. Even really popular books where I feel like the characters just don't cut it.
It's interesting
But
that you bring up those characters though, because I've always been very character driven,
mhm,
but a lot of the stories that have been coming to me in my MK work are very universe
mhm,
oriented.
yeah.
And I've been having to figure out like, oh, when you get the universe first in your head, how to bring the characters up from
Hmm.
falling flat, because that is something that happens
Yeah.
when your universe comes to you first, and then you have to bring the characters up to the same level as the universe. And you were asking me about the wingless and rewrites. My characters kept falling flat.
Yeah, that's tricky. I mean, the opposite problem can happen, right? Where your characters are very driven, but the universe is also flat. I do like a healthy kind of mixture of both, but at the end of the day, I'm a little bit more patient with a flatter universe than I am with the flatter character. That's my personal preference. I don't think that's the end all be all for everybody. Everyone has their own preferences. That's how I read, and I'm finding that's my voice as well so far. Now, I haven't written as much as you, so
Yeah,
I'm
I bet
I'm
you.
barely into it compared to you. Still finding that voice, still learning
how
more about my
many
writing style.
how many books have you written now? Because I have one of your books.
Yes, you have Sunfire.
Mm-hmm.
I have just published my fifth book, so
And this
I have
looks to be about 110K.
I think it's 98 actually, so
98.
just under 100. But
98.
it was supposed to be 60, and I failed.
Well, it's good
Yeah.
failure. Good failure.
Oh, well, I
We
appreciate that.
we
That
we
was a
want
little bit of an offshoot of it was a random story that came out of nowhere in the middle of my trilogy, which has a completely different style and voice. Absolutely different from that. That is off the wall writing right there.
well, I remember liking it. I mean, my memory sucks because of health problems, but I remember liking it. I didn't expect it to have a heaviness to it. You seem such
Mm.
a light character, on TT, and I was like, "Ooh, this is heavy," you know.
Yeah, it is. And when I continue, it was meant to be a standalone, but it won't be because of that heaviness, the implications of the story and results of what happened are grave on the world as it is in that book. So yeah, fascinating. But that voice finding it is just it's a fun. I do want to read Wingless even more as we're discussing it, but there's so much more that we could talk about with finding your voice and learning more about your style, but we are running a little bit short on time. So I'd love
Yeah.
to ask you, where can people find more information about you and your works if they want to contact you or buy your books?
Well, I'm pretty easily Googleable, mkdockery.com. I have a website. I also have a link tree. I don't know. It's like mkdockerylinktree.com. I don't know that much.
I don't know it either.
I,
Mine.
I don't
I
know. And then
Google is your friend.
if people are interested in Wingless, it's on Amazon and it's about to be approved through Ingram Sparks. So it'll be on Kobo, Nook, you know, all those
All the
places,
places.
all the places because it's gone wide. It's going wide. But yeah, Wingless is out there. Neon Lights of Sestafon probably in the next 4 or 5 months will be
Cool.
out. And then I'm also I also have Pointless Elopement, which is a Regency romance on Vella, and
Cool.
that's out. And then I have a The Dragon's Tribute on Vella.
How
So
cool. That is great. We could probably have an even longer conversation about serials and writing in that style. We'll have to do that another time because that fascinates me. The whole thing,
yeah.
learning and the potential of that is really interesting. But thank you so much for your time. This has been great.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, Dan.